Willie D Live.
What's up, family? We got a comedian beef. In this corner, Tiffany Haddish. In this corner, Loni Love. Yeah, fam, they are beefing. Now, why are these two accomplished women beefing? Well, as you know, Kevin Hart had his roast a couple of days ago, and a few days ago. And some people took exception to the tone of the roast, specifically the racial tone of the roast. So Tiffany Haddish is out on the streets and she's going in and out of somewhere. It's hard to tell, but you know how TMZ be ambushing, and they catch up with her and ask her, does she have about 30 seconds? They start talking. And the woman asked her, how she felt about people complaining about the roast, specifically Loni Love. And Tiffany at first was being diplomatic about it. She was like, hey, I was just sitting there, chilling, I didn't really do anything. I just had to pee the whole time. And I really didn't hear the joke about George Floyd, because that's what the big uproar is about, them making fun of George Floyd. Well, Tiffany said, well, I didn't hear the joke about George Floyd. And then TMZ chick kept pressing. To her credit, she's really good at what she does, because she had asked the question and Tiffany kind of, went around it. And then she came back full circle and asked the question again. She mentioned Loni Love again. And Tiffany said, are we talking about comedians that are mad that they wasn't invited to the roast? So, so some people didn't like that response. Some people thought that Tiffany was being dismissive. They thought that she was not taking the circumstances that surrounded George Floyd's death seriously enough. I saw Stephen Jackson said something about it. Stephen Jackson was very, very close with George Floyd. They were childhood friends. So obviously, anytime somebody says something disrespectful about George Floyd, he's going to have something to say about it, and rightfully so. But getting back to Tiffany, some people took exception to, her response. Now, let me tell you how I thought about it. I saw the whole thing too, and when I watch a roast, I expect people to go low. I expect them to go low. But that dude, Tony, I can't say his last name. I forget how to say his last name. Hinchcliffe or something like that. That dude, I do believe, is a racist. And because he's just too damn good at it. And he's preoccupied with blackness. He's preoccupied with the N-word. He's just always, and I think that he uses comedy to mask his racism. People dismiss it because, hey, it's comedy. We just laugh, we're just joking, right? If you go to his show, if you watch any of his shows, especially the one that he does in Austin, he invites black dudes on the show that uses the N-word a lot. And they just be going crazy with the N-word. They just, And so they really push the use of the N-word. So I do believe dude is a racist, but he get by with it because he frames it in a comedic fashion. I have no problem with racial jokes, but racist jokes is a different thing. And I do believe that Tony, and let me get his name right, fam. Tony. His real name is Tony Hinchcliffe. Okay, I said it right. So Tony Hinchcliffe, he, I do believe, is a roaring racist. And so this dude, he promotes it. See, the problem with his type of comedy, the biggest problem with it is, like I said, he's preoccupied with Black people. He talks about these Black events. You know, he talks about Black people and even deceased Black people, and he makes fun of it and stuff. But I very seldom hear him doing the same thing with white people. This is why I say he's a racist, because I don't see him having the same amount of energy for people that look like him or anybody other than Black people. Here's the thing about it. Why I mentioned the distinction between racist jokes and racial jokes. A racist joke is one of those jokes where clearly you're being disrespectful and you're being purposely hurtful. It's not just a joke. It's saying something where you're trying to hurt people. You're trying to hurt people. Whereas a racial joke can bring about an understanding or relatability. A racial joke will oftentimes invoke laughter from the targeted group first. What I mean by that is this. Richard Pryor was one of the most socially conscious, politically conscious comedians ever. But most people don't think of Richard Pryor like that. When people think of socially political comics, especially Black, they think of D.L. Hughley. They think of, what's his name? Dick Gregory, right? You know, they think of people like that. You know, people think of George Carlin, you know, those type of names, right? But Richard Pryor would talk about social events, and he talk about political events. And when he talk about these events where white people are at the center of these events, even when it was something tragic, he would make it funny enough to where white people laughed first. They didn't sit there and go like, you know, they laughed first. He figured out how to do it to where they laughed first. And then certain jokes, certain things were just off limits. I don't believe in the type of comedy that nothing is off limits. There should always be discernment in comedy. And I know it's hard a lot of times because comedians are going for the jokes. There are some comedians that say, man, if it's funny, I'm gonna tell a joke. If it's funny, I'm doing it. I don't give a damn. Because, you know, this ain't the easiest thing to do. Telling jokes ain't the easiest thing to do. So if you get a joke and it works, no matter who it hurts, you might want to tell it. Now, having said that, well, let me back up. So likewise, the way that Richard Pryor tells jokes, and he says something about white folks and they laugh first. If you're going to be a white person or any other person that's not Black, and you tell a joke about Black people, if Black people ain't laughing, you probably shouldn't have told that joke. If Black people are up in arms, you probably shouldn't have told that joke. And I don't know a lot of people who thought that was a good joke, who thought that was funny. I was like sitting there like, but I wasn't surprised because I know Tony's comedy. I know his brand of comedy. So I wasn't surprised he said something like that. I was able to, however, compartmentalize his act and look at the other stuff and say, overall, it was a good roast, right? But I don't care for dude at all. You know, I don't care for him at all because I do believe that he's a raging racist and he masks his racism with comedy. If you're going to tell jokes about any marginalized group, you should do it in a way where that marginalized group actually laughs first. But even if you do it, even if you tell a joke about a dominant group, the joke should come first, not the message. The joke should always be what you're aiming for, not the message. Some comedians get besides themselves and they want to be defiant. I'm going to tell a message. I don't care if they like it or not. I'm going to tell a message. No. You got to make sure if you are a comedian, you're going to be a comedian, be a comedian. Tell jokes, make people laugh, make people's days a little brighter, making them a little lighter and brighter, right? Now, if you're going to be an activist, be an activist. You don't give a damn who you anger. You want to get the message out. You know, right? Right? You get the message out. No matter what, you get the message out. You one or the other. Can't be both. So if you're going to be a comedian, you make sure that the jokes come first. It's the most important thing is the joke. Now, I know some of you saying, well, if you're saying the joke is first, then why are people offended about George Floyd? Because the shit ain't funny. You see what I'm saying? It ain't funny. Ain't nothing funny. You know, people died. A man was murdered by the police in broad daylight. You know, illegally murdered by the police in broad daylight. The dude put his foot on his neck and count down 8 minutes while the world watched. And the world responded with a worldwide protest. Billions of dollars in property was destroyed. Some people lost their lives in protest and rallies. People went to jail. What's funny about that? I don't find any humor in the death of George Floyd. I don't find any type of humor whatsoever in the death of George Floyd. So that's why people have a problem with what Tiffany Haddish had to say about that. And look, Loni Love, she says some questionable things herself. You know, she has done some dancing, some tap dancing with her time on that show she's on. Is she on The View or The Real? One of those shows, whatever that show is she's on. She's done some tap dancing herself. So she really ain't got a whole lot of room to be talking. But what Tiffany Haddish said was true. There was some comedians who only took exception because they wasn't invited to the roast. But what say you, fam? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. No more talk.